Hey, it's Tim here. Before the episode starts, first of all, just a sincere apology from me. This episode's about a month and a half late. I had some technical difficulties with the episode, so unfortunately I couldn't get it out on time, but here it is anyway. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of Datum. How are you, Ravi? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're over the heat wave that hit us a couple of weeks ago, where we all just completely melted, right?
I'm going to make my usual complaint that when it's happened 6 summers in a row, it's not a heat wave, it's called a season.
Right, exactly. It's no longer it's now a trend.
Yes, it is consistently hot each summer. It's no surprise. Therefore, it is summer. But yes, it's actually getting hotter and hotter, which is in itself a concerning thing. So it's technically always a heat wave because every year it beats the previous year's record. So it's technically a heat wave. Anyway, how have you been? We've been away from the podcast for some time, haven't we?
We have, yeah. I think things have been going on. I think our last one was our quick hot take on the Salesforce Tableau acquisition, which is now completed.
Yes,
as of last week. So yeah, no, it's been good. What else have I been up to? I went to the Tableau conference in Berlin.
Oh wow, how was that?
Yeah, it was good. It was I think it was the first one they've had away from London in Europe. And it was quite nice, a nice change of scenery, a good vibe. I think it was a bit more quieter and low. I wouldn't say low key, but it seemed a bit more spread out. Maybe it's just the German efficient overtones that did it. But a standard Tableau conference where you sort of go away and you meet people who have got the similar ideas and you come back energized. A couple of new features coming out which are worth checking out. But I think for me the biggest takeaway was the release of Tableau Blueprint.
Yeah, I mean, let's go into that a little bit. So like at a very high level, I'll probably talk about this at some other time, but at a high level, what is Blueprint?
It's kind of like Agile, I think, is the best way to explain it. It's sort of like this framework or strategy. It's not really a thing that you can hold and touch and grasp. It's more like an idea or an approach. So there used to be a document called Tableau Drive, which is about 8 pages long. And it wasn't really fit for purpose for like companies who are doing things at scale. So what's happened is Tableau's created this other thing called Blueprint, which gives you a bit more detail about different aspects. So there's an entire document or section about teams, about deployment, about measuring success, about education and learning. So it's all of these different aspects that some of it does seem like common sense, but it's quite nice to be able to point to something that gives you that answer. Cool. So in this sort of in the sort of job I do with customers and customer success and helping them, be the best they can be, this is always really interesting for me, which then harks back to all the things I've been doing with Tableau Server as well.
Good. So you've generally had a very busy summer. I think it's been a lot going on. You're also moving up in life, which is a good thing.
Exactly.
And you're cycling again, did I hear you say?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I'm back on the bike. I've done a couple of longish rides. And lots going on the personal life side of things. So moving on up and yeah. So it was all good. How about you? How's your summer been?
I have to say, I was about to say, next time you go on a cycle, why not invite me over so I can come with my new drone?
Oh, you finally got the drone.
Yeah, I did. So actually, the backstory to this is we were going to Ireland and we were going to an area in Ireland called Kerry. So it's on the sort of southern, my geography is awful, southwestern sort of part of Ireland. So it's about as far as you could get if you were driving somewhere in Ireland. So that's exactly what I did because we were taking our Toby, our dog. So that was a long drive. Anyway, I knew we were going to be doing some awesome hikes, seeing some awesome scenery in awesome places. The weather was looking good, and it was just one of those things where, okay, listen, if I'm going to get a drone to film something, and I'm going to have time, I checked the Irish airspace restrictions, and there were none in the area whatsoever, other than the usual sort of safety precautions you have to take when flying a drone. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to go in. So literally 2 days before we went to Ireland, this drone arrived. I got a pretty good deal on it, actually. It's the DJI Mavic Air, and oh my word, the man, I think the first 3 days, I think I was just flying it aimlessly. I didn't really care about the quality of the footage I was taking. But once I got into the flow, I think I put down about 4 hours of flight time, which if you know the batteries are 20 minutes each and I only had 3, that's sort of quite an achievement over a few days. Like you have to do some sort of midday charges. But anyway, no, I'll put a link to some of the footage, which I shot in 4K, but of course I have no 4K screen to look at it, and nor do I have a laptop that's capable of editing 4K. But I have the raw footage, so I'll just upload it straight to YouTube and see what happens.
Chuck it onto YouTube for about 20 seconds. Yeah. Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, very good, very good. Much needed break in Ireland. Absolutely beautiful place. I think highly encourage you, anyone who has a chance to go. Drone aside, it's just a beautiful place. You know, it's amazing.
But you're back at it now.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I'm back at it, and now I've got into sort of a role where I'm looking a lot at Tableau Embed. It's been quite an interesting journey.
Okay, yeah, because Embed's quite a new thing, right? So it's like Embed, it's like taking the chart part of Tableau and chucking it into like a HTML interface, as it were.
Yeah, I'd say the practice of embedding Tableau visualizations is not new. I think a lot of organizations have done it in internal portals and so on and so forth for quite some time. The difference is that Tableau's licensing now enables that to happen for your customers who are external to your organization. So previously, you'd get a Tableau server, you'd deploy it to everyone in your organization, and then you'd be done with it. If you wanted external customers, maybe you're a marketing company and you want to give sort of data to your customers, what you'd have to do is to create an internal email for that client, and then they'd have to log in and look at the content that way.
There's a few security risks with that sort of approach.
Exactly.
Right? Like IT teams will sort of look at you as if you've gone crazy.
Exactly. And it's not really feasible if you start, if you have something like 4,000 or 5,000 plus sort of external users. And so basically Tableau introduced a new license called the Embed license, which allows you to specify, certain data sources that are going to be used up front, sort of restricted domain of what your application is going to do. Normally it's just being embedded in a portal. And then you can basically make your Tableau visualizations open technically to the world through your whatever embed solution you're going to be doing. So it might be a website, it might be sort of part of a more comprehensive dashboard that's web and sort of Tableau based. But then also you get the benefit of doing things like authentication in your application. So you do this sort of security handshake with Tableau to verify that users are who they are. And then it means you can augment Tableau content with web content. And that's been sort of a really interesting thing I've seen in the last couple of weeks, actually, with a client.
Cool.
So that's cool, but it comes with its challenges. It's not it's not an easy thing to do. I think we'll probably talk about this some other time, but yeah, it's one of those really sort of, it sounds great, niche, but there's so many moving parts, and it actually means that unlike a normal Tableau installation, Tableau is not solely the focus, in an embed setup actually, and it's a mechanism for getting data from A to B, but it's not the predominant focus, and because of that, you can kind of find yourself in a situation where you haven't shown it enough love. So,
interesting. Very cool.
Very cool. But we've ranted on for a long time, and we haven't even told people what our show today is about.
So we were talking about AWS, and I think broadly the cloud, but the focus is on Amazon Web Services today. Right. Mainly because we've both been playing with it a bit. I think you've done a few more exams than I have.
Playing. Come on. I was not playing around with those exams.
No. Very true. Very true. We're getting skilled up. We're upskilling. We're trying to understand what the world of cloud is. So we're going to talk a bit more about that today.
Exactly. And I think when we say that, it's one of these things that's when you're covering technical things, you always have to preface with the fact that we are not experts. We are at the very beginning of our journey. We don't have the year of experience that you'll find recruiters asking for, even though there's such a thing that doesn't exist. We're kind of coming at this from an analytics perspective, because we're not cloud engineers per se.
I don't think we want to be. Oh, at least I don't want to be.
Oh, yeah, we. Who's we, Ravi?
full stack developer, here you come.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about AWS today. For anyone who's wondering what the hell is AWS, it's an acronym short for Amazon Web Services. I've got a bit of an embarrassing thing to admit. I used to say AWS.
Oh, wow. Look at this guy.
When I first came across it, I saw the acronym AWS,
And he just said it as
and I just
it
said
is.
ORS, Amazon ORS. And the funny thing is, the person I said this to didn't correct me for a solid 2 months. Then not even once said, "You do know it's AWS." And then I said it in a meeting, and I think 3 people laughed at me, and they were like, "You mean AWS?" And I was like, "Oh."
Would have been nice to know beforehand.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Cool. So Amazon Web Service sort of came out. I don't think it came out of nowhere, because the history of Amazon is pretty wild, right? Because it started off as the online bookstore.
Well, yeah. I mean, it came out of nowhere. It was, you didn't expect it to come from a retail company, right?
No.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the really interesting thing about Amazon Web Services, and the fact basically what they're doing is they've got loads of computing power and loads of computing storage, and they're selling it as a service, right? And I think this was one of the first of its kind where they were like, you know what, we've got computing power, let's monetize this. And there's actually, once you think about it, there are only a few companies in the world that have the infrastructure and the redundancy. So like if something fails, something else picks it up. That's what I mean by redundancy, to do that. So Amazon is one of them. Another one you probably say is Google. Apple, probably, if they ever want to get into that space. Facebook, even, like Facebook must have billions of servers, or not billions, but a lot of server space at least, that they might be able to monetize, but if they want to.
And so that's the interesting thing. I think this is inherently because Amazon's a retail sort of company. And if you think of when AWS was launched, it was back in sort of 2003, 2004. So it's actually been with us for more than a decade. And the approach generally within Amazon, and something that Jeff Bezos actually kind of instills in the ethos at Amazon, is that when you build a solution, the first thing you have to do once you've built that solution is you have to make it in such a way that it can be packaged for not just your own sort of benefit, but so that other people in the organization can use it. So the team that built Amazon.com, they had to not only build Amazon.com, but they then had to modularize things like the shopping basket. They had to modularize things like the forum. They had to modularize things like the server infrastructure that was driving that, shopping carts and so on and so forth. So by forcing the organization to break the component parts of the solution down into its separate bits, it actually enabled them to turn each of those components into products. And the main reason was, if they were going to play in the retail space,
right,
in a data-driven world, in a technology space, they needed not only just to sell goods and so on and so forth, but they actually needed to enable other organizations to do the same thing in the same space. So that was actually his initial philosophy around AWS. Let's not just sell stuff. Let's not just enable people to sell stuff through our, warehouses. Let's give the whole world the ability to sell at the kind of scale that we do through our infrastructure.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? And I don't think anyone else would consider to get into that space, because it's almost like you've got the big players already now. Right. I don't think it's really hard. It can be really hard for anyone to break through into that. Like, I think the original servers as a service, as it were, was like Rackspace, who gave you a provisioned amount, but didn't give you the flexibility that Amazon Web Services offered when they first came into play. But then now we're in 2019, and we're talking about that if anyone's going to break into this market, well, it's pretty difficult because there's such established players already.
Exactly. And actually, what's been interesting is to see the evolution of AWS as the pioneering sort of cloud product. And there's if you get into sort of your first hour of learning AWS, if you've used the AWS material, they give you this thing called a 10,000 foot view, right? Which is basically just showing the history and the overall view of, what AWS offers. And actually, they started from one very basic service, back in 2004. I think it was SQS, which is like basically a messaging system. And then in 2006, they launched it properly. And over time, what they've done is they've brought more and more features, sort of modularize each of those things into sort of components, to the point where this what was previously a problem in IT and technology infrastructure, where if you wanted to test an idea, You had to go out, provision your infrastructure. It would literally take 6 months for it to arrive. And then you needed the skills to deploy it in a way that worked. And the most important thing here is that even if you were testing these things, this infrastructure would not scale at the same pace that your solution would. So you had to take a lot of upfront bets if you ever wanted to build anything that was at the kind of scale as Amazon or Google and so on and so forth, because having that kind of hardware and infrastructure was just a really big constraint.
Exactly, and that flexibility point is something that's so big, that from what I understand at least, right? So if I want to add, I don't know, a bunch more of hard disk space or RAM or random like memory to my server, I can do that with the click of a button with all of these web-based services where I'm using the cloud, versus having to go down to my computer, pause it, open it up, actually put the actual hardware in. So yeah, I mean, and I think the other big thing that Amazon have done well, I think we're into the sort of about to teach on to so what part of the podcast, but what they've really done well is the learning part, right? So we both have been using the Amazon materials, and I think what they did quite nicely was they got stuck in, right? They were like, right, if we want people to actually use our softwares and all the services we provide, because there's a lot, like I think on that training course, if you ever look and start understanding the sheer volume of services that Amazon Web Services offers with their infrastructure, you've got stuff like robotics and satellites and machine learning, as well as the more simple stuff like databases and computers and servers. Alongside all of that comes a bunch of training content, and it's like, right, here's everything you need to know to understand how these products work, how these services work. We can teach you, we can educate you. And that's really interesting. And I think that's also a great USP, right? Because it's such a rich volume of content people are using.
It is. And it's interesting. I think they did something really smart, which is very early on, they encouraged lots of developers to go on and build solutions on there. If it wasn't for AWS, I don't think half the startup technology firms that we know today, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, iCloud even runs on AWS. All of these things would simply not exist. Tableau Public, yes. All these things wouldn't exist because what Amazon did was they took the economies of scale of all these ideas and gave them a platform. That's literally all they did, right? So everyone has great ideas, but the problem is you don't have the spare capacity just sitting around. You don't have like 64 core Dell PowerEdge server just sitting around. But if you could have that server for just 2 hours to prove out something, just to build something and test it, maybe it's a Snowflake infrastructure, or maybe it's iCloud or something like that. If you just have that for 2-3 hours, build it out, test it, show it to someone, show it to an investor, that opens up doors. And if you take the aggregate opportunity that exists, people's creative ideas in that same space, you end up being able to run one of these Dell PowerEdge servers 24/7 and at marginal cost because it's always being utilized, right? And so AWS basically made this their business model. And they obviously charge you a premium on top of the actual cost of running these things. But they've gone all the way to where we are today, where they have a concept such as spot pricing, where you can basically say, hey, I have this piece of work. I don't really care when it runs. I need it, some point in the next month. When your servers are about, 30 pence per hour, let me know and deploy the script.
Turn my server on and run the script, exactly.
And if it doesn't finish,
amazing.
Fine. That's incredible. That's just incredible. Like, you're basically turned server infrastructure into an auction. You've done Google AdSense on IT infrastructure. It's crazy.
It's super smart as well, right? It just makes sure that people use it, and as once you get to the point of flexibility, it's funny when people talk about Amazon Web Services, you talk about the price, and it's really cheap, but it really isn't. Like if you're going at scale, it's definitely not cheap, or it's cheap enough for you to get started, and then you start thinking, hang on a second, this is pretty expensive as a recurring cost. But I think that a lot of that comes down to like not understanding how Amazon Web Services prices everything, right? I think that's something that we've talked about in the past before. But that spot pricing thing, you're just creating a completely new market, and you're allowing people to just be like, right, I want to be using this at this time for this price.
Yeah. So the most interesting example I can think of this is Dropbox. So Dropbox started off entirely powered by AWS. And they're probably the most sort of forefront example of a company that moved to this concept of a multi-cloud setup. So they actually invested into their own cloud infrastructure, and they still rely on AWS. But they have this sort of multi-cloud setup. So they've moved certain components of their, cloud infrastructure onto their own internal setup, which they have more control over, sort of more visibility over. And we'll come onto this sort of concept of security and stalking that Amazon might do if, you run their service on their platform. We'll come to that in a second. But yeah, they have more sort of flexibility and freedom, as it were. And then they're keeping the components that aren't as critical, that are cheaper to run on things like Amazon, whether it's S3 or whatever. And it's a fascinating sort of model. If you look at companies like Apple, who also use AWS to power iCloud storage, it's really fascinating that someone like Apple doesn't see its competitive advantage in setting up its own cloud infrastructure at all. So it delegates nearly all of its iCloud storage to AWS, whereas it keeps things like the servers that run iOS verification and iOS app delivery, those are all still maintained and run by Apple. So this whole multi-cloud setup is also a new concept that I think is possible for the large enterprise who can kind of do that long-term strategic investment. It's almost like a test, right? If you haven't been able to sort of manage and grow your infrastructure to a certain scale on AWS, then you're probably not ready for the multi-cloud setup because you probably don't have a sort of various set of skills behind you.
So here's a big question, right? How often would you even change that? So you've just migrated all your stuff from that computer sitting under IT's desk into the cloud. At what point do you say, you know what, this isn't working, let's move to something else? Would you even bother doing that?
So this is a very interesting concept because up until maybe 3 years ago, I think it was if anyone mentioned the cloud, they'd only talk about AWS. Now you have Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's offering, and then you have Google Cloud Platform, which is Google's offering. And you have sort of the smaller players like Rackspace and a few others, Oracle, who are, I love the Gartner Magic Quadrant this because it calls them niche players, which is like a backhanded compliment in many ways.
It's like it's going to take you a lot of like legacy stuff for you to want these guys.
Yeah, exactly. These are niche players. Anyway, it's like Oracle, like a multi-billion-dollar company, niche player in the cloud. It's such a backhanded compliment. But anyway, these companies have come to the fore now, and they're bringing their USP. So I always think of Microsoft's USP. People will disagree with me here, but they were kind of late to everything. So their USP is that so are their customers, and so they're going to bring them with them, right? Like, hey, you've spent so much on this Microsoft platform. Let's move you to a cloud platform instead, and here are the savings we can offer you. Here are all the new opportunities that open up. And so they're being very successful, actually, using that, bringing all their existing customers with them on that journey. Google has come at this from their core competency, which has actually been machine learning and understanding. Basically, they were the first cloud company. I mean, Google Search was the first cloud product.
Right.
Like here, before even Amazon.com, that was the first cloud product because it required so much geographical and computing challenge. I mean, I think it was only 3 years ago I stopped seeing Amazon turn up as a bookstore in Luxembourg on my invoice. Like, and Google figured that out sort of right early on. I'm actually reading a biography about how the Google was set up as a company, and it's going into sort of lots of amazing details. But that's Google's core competency, and so I think now in today's world, when you think about multi-cloud setup, how do you transition between them? Well, it's interesting because all the platforms are building setups that allow you to hop between them, and they allow you to kind of, talk from one to the other. And the only real restriction is actually the barrier, which is data transfer. If the only thing that's actually stopping you from moving from one to the other is data transfer, typically all
and,
the
and
platforms,
security to an extent, I guess.
Yeah, I always think security is like a scarcity. Security is like one of those things that's subjective because it depends on which side of the wall you're standing on, right?
Right.
And I think
true.
depending on where you're standing, it can look completely different. So I never objectively look at it and say, oh, that's the reason you choose one over the other, because it just requires you to look at security from the perspective of that company. And if you don't,
True.
then it's not something you're going to go for. So it's not like you either like it or you don't with the respective platforms. Fundamentally, all cloud platforms offer you to set up security in the way that you would want. So, enterprise security is well understood. The concepts are well researched. Everyone's going to be offering the same thing. If you go to servers, right? Everyone's running a Linux server, a Windows server, and they're all basically just doing the same thing. Where you get competencies are when people like Google have this TPU, tensor processing unit, which is a custom processor that processes specific types of computations much more efficiently.
Many for things like TensorFlow and all that machine learning stuff.
Exactly. And so,
and I'm sure Amazon have the same sort of thing with their machine learning capabilities as well. Right?
And then you also have the the hardware game changing, because of course Intel's no longer a dominant player in the CPU market. It's people like AMD and even not Qualcomm, AMD and ARM.
That's what you're thinking. Yeah.
ARM processors, which isn't actually one company; it's a consortium of companies that are invested in a particular way of making
a shared interest. Yeah,
low power usage, high efficient, highly multi-core setups that are now starting to be considered for things like server usage.
And Apple as well, of course, are in the process.
Absolutely. They're Apple just acquired Intel's LTE 5G whatever acronym we're on now chip unit. So the USBs are revolving around what is your core competency, what is your hardware infrastructure like, is there anything unique to you that you can offer, and where those things are unique, those platforms are pretty good at talking to other platforms. They're not sort of siloed. So I could have a process running on TensorFlow and then dumping the results in Amazon S3. I'm not sort of wedded to one place. And I think this is going to make the cloud wars very interesting, because I think they've only just begun.
The cloud wars.
They've only just begun. And
wow.
Amazon has sort of first strike advantage because it has the biggest player base, but I also think it's got the
and
most
also the
to
brand.
lose. Well, I'm not sure about the brand. And
of course. Are they the big evil empire in this game?
Because you can't disassociate AWS from Amazon, and the company that was the first to put a microphone in your living room and listen to everything you've ever said, even
transcribe it and then send you ads based on that.
Exactly. So it's hard as an IT director or a CIO to sit in your home and worry about that kind of stuff when at home, and also know that that's the same company that's powering your infrastructure back in the office. And so it's
you're financing that.
Yeah, exactly.
You're financing the economies of scale that makes Alexa only £20 to £50.
Yeah,
just for Amazon to listen to you.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because that becomes a real problem. There are companies now who wish to compete with Amazon, and inherently, therefore, can't use AWS, yet it's the best option for them, if that makes sense. And they're finding it very, very hard to do business. This is a large sort of discussion in America at the moment called antitrust, where if we take Amazon Marketplace as an example, Amazon sell lots of products. They, of course, have analytics on what's selling and what's not. They also have their own brand goods. And it just so happens that their own brand goods highly correlate with some of the most sold products on the Amazon Web Store. Okay,
right.
So go for it.
Yeah, and this also comes down to the fact that Amazon aren't exactly, the reviews that Amazon had about being the company to work for, or rather being one of the worst companies in the world to work for, given the long hours and sort of what's the word, like just a lack of compassion for a company.
Yeah,
it's just
professional empathy, I'd say. Yeah.
You're so replaceable.
Yeah.
Basically, everyone's told as soon as you go in. That doesn't do great for their image either.
Exactly.
And especially given that their market cap is so big, and Jeff Bezos's personal wealth is just growing and growing. And as we said before, like it's not like people generally would change their cloud platform too frequently. So you're just stuck on the subscription model where you're spending 20, 30, 40,000 pounds or dollars a year.
Exactly. And you don't see this friction with Microsoft, because guess what? Microsoft has been your enterprise partner for the last, I don't know,
just scale.
10, 15 years. And, they've yet to prove that they look at your server logs and start upselling you on X. They've yet to produce a product that sits in your living room and stalks you. They've yet to have a bad sort of story in the press about privacy or anything. So
what you mentioned earlier is quite funny, given so that Microsoft always late to the game. I mean, in this case, it's a great thing that they're late to the game.
Right?
They've not got a brand to such a negative brand about them. They're like, we're the Windows guys. We Excel, that's us.
Yeah,
like that's their USP. That's their like platform for selling, and because of that, they get leverage on these massive corporate deals they do. It's
exactly.
Like, well, you're buying Office 365 from us, you may as well just push up all your stuff onto Azure, because then you get all this discount. We'll actually give you discounts on all the other stuff you're buying, because you're just doing all your services through Microsoft.
And whilst you're at it, we'll chuck in SharePoint lists for you. And and by the way, I see you using Slack. Let's chuck in Teams as well. No, that will cost nothing. And
what's your data viz tool? Let's give you Power BI, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've already got Excel. Here's Power BI. They have this immense capability to bundle, and actually, they've been very good at it for years. I mean, everyone's always said Microsoft is going to die, but guess what? They're still here. They're still one of the top 3 or 4 companies in market cap in the world, and they're still making money. I think they got rid of certain individuals in leadership at the right time. Bill Gates at the right time. Steve Ballmer, he had his ups and downs, but people criticize Steve Ballmer.
He's the hype man.
I'm going to defend him a little bit here, because he's the hype man. But guess who started Azure 3 years before Satya Nadella came to the fore? It was Steve Ballmer, because he saw this coming and he turned the ship in the right way. And he obviously had to leave to not be associated with it. And that's essentially what happened. But anyway, Microsoft has a lot to gain in this place. Now, Google, on the other hand, they suffer from the same sort of problem as Amazon. If you put something on your Google server, can you be sure that they're not going to look at your logs and see what you're doing?
I remember a previous company I worked for, and we sort of there was a massive overhaul. So I used to use. Have you ever heard of the IBM's email client?
I don't know what it was called, but yeah.
You know the one I mean. It was something horrible.
Is it Lotus?
Anyway,
Lotus
Notes.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Oh wow. Yeah.
Journalists still use that stuff, man. It hasn't gone away.
God. Yeah, I know. So Lotus Notes was what was used at the company I worked for, and then they were like judging, and a couple of other vendors like. So Google came in, Microsoft came in, they let IBM pitch again, and apparently the security message that Google gave them is, you can trust us, we're Google. You can. I was like, wow, that's like, I don't know, you going into a bar and an Eastern European being like, hey, let me take your phone. I'm not going to steal your data or anything like that. Like, it's the stereotypes you've done to it. If you say you just trust me, you're inevitably going to be like, why shouldn't I trust you?
Exactly, and actually, it shows even when a company says, look, just trust us, we're not going to do anything crazy, that does not negate the fact that people make mistakes. And I hate that sort of complacency that it's okay, we won't screw up, it's fine, you can trust us.
It's exactly the shady guy in the bar saying, like, hey, just trust me.
Yeah, that's not the problem. The problem is that mistakes happen. And actually, if you don't have due diligence up front, you don't give yourself enough chance to see where the mistakes can happen, and that's where these companies kind of fall over in the space at the moment. So we've kind of gone off tangent a little bit there, but if we go back to sort of the cloud and AWS, I think it's an interesting time. They are going to increasingly sell more and more products. I think they're going to launch more and more products. I think the cloud market's now starting to get saturated in as much as the big players have all turned up and they're all basically selling the same thing. So it's really, it's really hard to innovate in terms of new solutions without a competitive advantage that is unique to yourself, right? Otherwise, everyone's just basically buying the same processing unit from Intel, shoving it in the same Dell PowerEdge server and putting it in the same rack that everyone can buy and put in their own data center in generally the same locations. In the UK, that's Slough, Yeah.
I think what you said earlier, the cloud wars will ultimately be decided on who can give you the best bang for your buck.
Exactly.
Right? It will always come down to cost. Always come down to cost. Like you work with any IT team, always comes down to cost. How much can we save? How much can we get a discount on this product?
So, and this is where I start to think, how long before cloud infrastructure, funnily enough, starts to become about hardware again, basically? So, this thing where we kind of try to abstruse ourselves from the hardware goes full circle, and actually companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft start investing in their own hardware divisions, because the competitive advantage moves away from being the same components everyone can buy to being specifically how you design that. The kind of thing that, guess what kind of company is good at that kind of stuff?
Tableau.
No. I wish. Begins with A and ends in E.
Azure?
Apple.
No, wait.
Apple,
of course.
Apple. And obviously Apple has no desires right now to get into that game. But you can absolutely
no
see
chance.
how that model absolutely suits them, right?
We're just going to make you the best product possible.
Exactly.
We're going to make it as easy as possible to deploy, and you just didn't even have to think. We're just going to do it for you.
Exactly.
Snap your fingers and it will turn up.
Which is, funnily enough, where AWS is going with all its latest offerings. Here's Lightsail. It just figures it out for you. And here's, I think one USP of Google actually over Amazon is that it automatically adjusts the hardware, so you're automatically paying the lowest price. I think that's one of the features that it has over AWS, whereas AWS has this cost estimator that shows you how you can save money, and then you have to take the action yourself.
See, I'm on two minds about that. I'm not sure I agree that's a good thing. I think it depends. We're back at the favorite phrase of any consultant or person that works in any sort of tech thing. It depends. But like if you're scaling, for example, if we look at the world we live in with Tableau and Alteryx, you kind of want that throughput, you kind of want that high ceiling, because you like what happens when 10,000 people come in on, if you're at university and everyone wants to look at the student survey. What happens when everyone clicks that link on Monday morning at 9 a.m.
Right,
and then you're going to get a coffee and if someone tells you the server's gone down, you're like, oh no, what on earth happened? And you look at the calendar.
But that's
you want that ceiling rather than a flexible cloud deployment that will sort of just eke it up slowly on its way.
But the thing is that it's interesting because, again, I actually trust Google to do that better than Amazon, right? Because when has Google search ever been down? And how many times has Amazon been down, right? When was the last time Google search went down?
Never.
Exactly.
Oh my, yeah. And like Facebook goes down, WhatsApp goes down, Instagram was down a couple of weeks ago.
AWS goes down, when
AWS does go down.
And the funny thing, when AWS goes down, everything goes
down.
Your phone doesn't know what's going on for a couple of days. Apps stop working. It's just a nightmare. And that's the thing. Yeah, I actually trust a company like Google to nail that bit of the game a little bit better, because I look at their experience and they're running their own stuff, and cloud infrastructure is basically make available what you use internally to the mass market.
I also think the scale comes into this as well. Again, like we talked about Azure a bit. We talked about, if you've got a Redshift database, go for Amazon. If you've got something in Google BigQuery, go for Google. The only thing I will say for Google is the interface isn't great to use.
So this is an interesting thing. I think you're absolutely right, because I think we've it's funny. When I use AWS, when I'm learning AWS, more to the point, and I've used some aspects of the AWS, it feels like something that was built with jQuery back in I don't know when, and it's all very, here's a button, here's a select box, type in what you want here, here's a drop down, and it feels like it could have been built with a very sort of straightforward UI. Google, on the other hand, have maybe gone a bit too far on the right-hand side of the dial, where they've tried to purposefully design a really slick
something
interface,
sexy,
and it feels like it got as much love in terms of UX design as it did cloud design, right? And in a product like that, that's not reassuring in one sense, and actually it gets in the way of using the product, which I think Amazon gets absolutely right. An example I'll give is learning AWS versus learning Google Cloud Platform. Now, the Google Cloud Platform way of doing this is to literally create you a temporary Gmail account that is active for 45 minutes to cover the 10-minute lesson you've started. And then by the end of the lesson, it deactivates yourself and gets rid of the credits that you had associated with that account. I mean, that's just incredible, okay? That's genius. Amazon's solution let's just give you a whole year's worth of free tier, off you go. Like, it's just much simpler. works exactly the same way.
Figure it out, have some fun, and then we'll go from
exactly.
there.
And we just need to make sure your credit card's on file. Like,
Yeah.
Google doesn't actually ask you for a credit card up front. And so it's an interesting model. The Google approach is over-designed, but it took me 15 minutes just to figure out how that sort of learning platform works, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And that carries through to an extent to the cloud platform. But I think the thing to bear in mind is that we are judging it as new users, and therefore our experience of using these things is mostly through interfaces, right? And in reality, most companies and most enterprise solutions don't use the interfaces at all. They use SDKs or command line arguments to basically control these platforms. So in one respect, I think we're qualified to talk about sort of how you use these things on face value. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of understanding how differentiated the SDKs and the command line sort of integrations are, and how do they support a wide range of languages so that you can have developers skilled up in a few languages but still find the thing you need in any cloud platform. I think that's always a valid concern for sort of IT teams who always recruiting for full stack developers, but just want someone good at one thing.
I love the term full stack developer. I think we've been over this before. It's like, you don't want that. You just want this tiny part to someone to do that, and then someone available to do the rest if you ever need it. Yeah, exactly. So it's cool. It's a fascinating sort of area. I think the now what. We're talking about AWS today. It's been around for over a decade. It's nothing new. There's no big revelation, I think, in our discussion. I think it's an interesting journey for you and me because it's worth keeping an eye on. I think for the general consumption, it's sort of like everyone's been talking about cloud and then sort of disappeared, but now everyone's starting to do cloud.
Yeah,
everyone talked about it for ages and ages when the first big data phenomenon came along. Cloud is the future, but then that future's now. So now, this is the time to start thinking about what is Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform and Microsoft Azure, and what does this brave new world mean for me?
Exactly. I saw an interesting chart last week shared by a colleague, which was talking about the hype cycle, right? And initially a product shoots to astronomical peaks, and the peak of its hype cycle, it plummets to well below its anticipated sort of actual settling point, and then rises back to healthy levels of hype. And I feel like with the cloud, we are now emerging from the trough and coming back up to this healthy level of understanding of what it actually is and where its core competencies are, because a few of the early innovative companies have used it well enough and trained up people well enough that those people have gone out to other organizations, started their own things, and now disseminated that knowledge more broadly. I always feel like that's what has to happen before these things are industry-wide, right? The engineers that worked at Facebook, Google, Amazon 10 years ago, they're the ones now running, head of IT or head of infrastructure at all these other new companies, that are in the FTSE 100s and stuff. And now that stuff is becoming mainstream.
Exactly. It's coming on into its own now. This is when you set up and start paying attention, not the early days.
Exactly. and the market's going to continue to grow. I think cloud infrastructures continue to grow at a healthy rate year on year. So that only means that I think more solutions will end up on the cloud. I'm not convinced we'll ever go to a cloud-only world. I think
definitely not. Definitely not.
The hybrid infrastructure is too valuable for companies.
And banks exist.
And yeah, banks exist, but even they're threatened by new technologies like Bitcoin and the emerging sort of challenger banks who are have app-only sort of infrastructures, right?
True.
So, which are all driven on the cloud. Like Monzo doesn't have like a data center sitting somewhere. 100% has that entirely on some sort of cloud platform. I'd actually be fascinated to know which. I might have to do some IP tracking
research into that.
Just put my phone on a specific IP address and put a sniffer on, and let's have a look. Might be able to find out. But yes, I think it's a really good time to be interested in the cloud. More importantly, there is now enough, I think, tangible and good practice examples compared to where we were maybe 5-10 years ago, where it was quite an innovative tool. And in terms of analytics, I'm actually interested to see what possibilities this open up, because to me, this is like a first tier thing, right? Where before the car was invented, first you needed the idea of a combustion engine. Then you needed the idea of a tire. Then you needed the idea of a wheel. All of these things had to happen, in a certain order. And the final thing was the industrialization. So you could have made all these things bespoke, but actually to make thousands of them, you needed the industrialization to take place. Likewise with the cloud, I think the cloud is sort of an enabling sort of thing. And with analytics, now that it's here, now we have all sorts of computational power available to us, whether it's RAM, hard drive, compute, databases that respond lightning fast. What new solutions can we mold together to answer really tough analytical problems, right? That need scale, need agility, sort of, need solutions that need to be built as quickly as the people who think of them need them, if that makes sense. So if your data scientist thinks of a question tomorrow, how quickly can you stand up an environment that lets him or her answer that question?
Right. And that speed to insight is exactly the thing that's interesting. It's like, how is this going to enable more people to ask better questions and also scale those questions better across the board as well?
Right. Absolutely. Right. I think that's been a really interesting topic. We kind of talked freely there today, and it was this very interesting chat.
I think it still follow the structure to an extent, though.
Yeah, we could easily do a whole season on AWS, and we could easily do a whole season on any cloud platform. But that's maybe not us. There's lots of good
no.
AWS and cloud platform podcasts out there. We'll probably find a couple and link them in the show notes. If you're at all interested, if you see us in person, by all means, come and chat to us. I think this is a very interesting discussion. We'd love to hear people talk to us about
people's ideas. Yeah,
exactly. We changed our name in case you missed that. A nice new logo as well. So we are datumpodcast.com and also datumpod on Twitter. So you can come find us there and give us some feedback. Let us know what you think of the show, and also give us ideas. Right, in terms of future shows, Ravis, we have something kind of slightly different planned, don't we?
Yeah, we've got something brewing. We've got a couple more episodes in this format with the bits and the bytes, and then we're going to try something new called Analog.
Exactly.
And then Tim, do you want to talk a bit more about Analog, or do you want to leave it as a teaser?
I think I'll mention something very briefly. So we've had the concept of bits, which are small sort of bites about technology, bytes which are softer discussions about concepts, AWS being one, learning being another. And Analog is a slightly new area where we're going to start talking to the personalities behind the technologies, basically. So whether it's a developer, a technical evangelist, we're going to be talking directly to those people and find out what really motivates them and drives them and sort of inspires them to work in the space that we work in. And
exactly.
The key reason we're doing this actually is because it suits the timeline of the show, where we go into October, November, and December, and we have this very compressed period where we get together as a community in a sort of very short amount of time. So we thought we'd try and capitalize on that and try and sort of flip the focus of the show a little bit. So I think going forward next year, you'll probably have 10 bytes, 10 bits, and then towards the end of the year, you'll have analog sort of shows, and that will sort of see us off nicely for the end of the year.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'm really excited for Analogs. I think we as you say, we're entering September, October, or Techtober, as Marcus Brownlee would say, right? Like
absolutely. We are 3 weeks from the iPhone launch.
Exactly. And if you live your life between iPhone and MacBook launches, or Tableau conference to Tableau conference, or whatever it might be, this is the time when you start gearing up and cracking your knuckles to be like, hey, let's get something cooking here.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's very, very exciting times ahead. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the analog. But I think before that, we've got a couple of bits and bytes to come.
Yeah.
But yeah, like keep tuned and keep sending us feedback.
Absolutely. We would love if you could take a couple of minutes to leave us a nice little star on iTunes if you're listening on iTunes. The reason being is that in the last couple of months, a lot has changed in the podcast world, hasn't it, Ravi? And reviews now matter a little bit more than I think they used to in the past. So in order for us to kind of stay relevant, we'd love to know what you think of the show on places like iTunes. If you like the show, you know what to do. Give us as many likes as you can, and if not, then give us feedback. We love feedback. We're going to be opening up more ways that you can give us direct feedback about the shows and topics that you want to hear about. So, sorry to do a shameless plug there on reviews, but yes, if you have a moment, just hit the star button. I think
yeah, exactly. at least 4 stars. But yeah, no, I think I'm going to leave it with a something from the Peter Crouch podcast where he's like, pass the pod, find someone to pass the pod on to.
Pass the pod. And then, right.
And then sort of goes from there.
I never thought I'd be seeking advice from Peter Crouch, but here we are. Right.
Exactly.
Take it easy, mate.
Nice one. Take care. See you later, guys. Bye.